Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah, glad to be here.
We are so excited to dig into a pretty fascinating topic today. A lot of folks have been asking us to take a closer look at the Late Start program in Darien School District 61.
Yeah, it's been a pretty big shift for them.
Yeah, and we've got some really interesting source material to work with for this one. A detailed Board of Education presentation from March 2025. And what's really great is it includes perspectives from both the teachers who are living this change every week and the administrators who help design and implement the program.
That's right. So we're getting those different angles. So not just the what, but the how, and maybe even some of the why behind this whole late start idea.
Exactly. So think of this as your all-access pass to understanding the Late Start program in Darien 61. We're going to unpack the reasons behind it, what happened when they first rolled it out, the challenges they faced, and how they've worked to make it even better.
It's a story that a lot of districts can probably relate to. Change is never easy, but sometimes it's absolutely necessary. And there are always lessons to be learned along the way.
All right, so Late Start. Essentially what they're doing is giving teachers a solid 60 minutes every week for professional learning. They call it PLT, and this was part of an agreement they worked out with the Teacher Association. But it sounds like this wasn't just a box to check to fulfill a contract. They're really trying to be intentional about this time.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. That agreement might have been the initial push, but you can see from the presentation that they're tying this late start to some bigger picture goals. They even use the term collective efficacy, which basically means building this culture where teachers feel like they're all in it together and that they can make a real difference when they work collaboratively.
Okay, so it's not just about professional development in isolation. It's about creating this sense of shared purpose and a belief that they can really move the needle on student learning when they work together.
Exactly. And they also see this as a strategy to keep good teachers and attract new ones. Teacher retention and recruitment. Huge issues these days. And of course, at the end of the day, it's all about improving outcomes for the students. That's the ultimate goal.
So ideally, everybody wins. Teachers get the support they need, the district is in a better position to staff their schools, and students get the best possible education.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't just magically add time to the day, right? How did they make this work logistically?
Right. Well, to get that 60 minutes of PLT every Wednesday, the school day for students starts an hour later. So there was an adjustment. They had to shorten the regular classroom schedule by about 35 minutes. But the presentation really frames this as a strategic trade-off. Less time in class on Wednesdays, but they're hoping that translates into higher quality instruction and more focused support for students throughout the week.
Interesting. So a calculated risk. And this PLT, it's not just free for all time, is it? There's some structure to how they're using it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's actually broken down into three main categories. So first you have what they call district-directed time, and that's really focused on big picture initiatives, training that everyone needs to be a part of. Think of it as those district-wide priorities.
Got it. So like those universal things that apply to all teachers in all schools.
Right. Then there's building directed time, and this is where each school gets to zero in on their own specific goals and needs. So the stuff that's really relevant to their building, their students, their community.
Okay, so that makes sense, tailoring it to the local context. And then the third category was it department and team directed time.
Exactly. This is where teachers who teach the same grade level or the same subject, or maybe even those working within a specific instructional team, they get to come together and really dive deep into planning, looking at student data, figuring out strategies that are specific to their classrooms.
So it's almost like a tiered approach.
Yeah.
The district sets the broad strokes, the schools figure out the local details, and then the teacher teams get down to the nitty-gritty of what's happening in the classroom. Really interesting.
Yeah, and this is a really important point. Throughout the presentation, they keep emphasizing that this whole program is seen as a continuous improvement cycle. They even use the framework of plan, do, study, act.
Plan, do, study, act. I'm familiar with that. That's a really common model for making change, and it makes a lot of sense in this context.
Yeah.
So they planned it out, they implemented it, now they're in the studying it part and then acting on what they learn. So this presentation that we're looking at, it's really a snapshot of where they are in that cycle.
Yeah, they even say this is our process of that continuous, improvement process with the plan, do, study, act. Planning, you plan it out, you do something, you study it, and then you act, and you just continue that cycle. They're acknowledging that this isn't a one and done thing. It's about constantly evaluating, tweaking, making it better.
Okay, so let's get to the good stuff. What did they learn from this initial implementation? What were some of the positive things they observed?
Well, right off the bat, they saw teachers using this time for some really practical things. Like they were having more in-depth conversations about their teaching strategies, they were really digging into student data together, and they were using the time to review and refine their school improvement plans. So making sure everyone was on the same page.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's something a lot of teachers crave, right? That dedicated time to really collaborate and learn from each other. Can you give us an example of how that played out in a specific school?
Absolutely. They highlighted the fourth grade teachers, and what they did was they used their PLT to really analyze the assessments that went along with their new CKLA curriculum. Now, CKLA is a specific literacy program, and what's important here is that these teachers were using their time to really figure out if it was working for their students.
Right. So not just assuming that a new curriculum is automatically going to be the magic bullet, they're taking the time to see how it's actually playing out in their classrooms. That's smart.
And one teacher even said, it's really nice to have that 60 minutes of time to kind of look at how our students did, look at the data, and then kind of adjust from there for what we need to do next year at this time. So they're not just analyzing for the sake of analyzing, they're using that data to inform their instruction going forward.
So it sounds like that protected time for reflection and planning was really valuable. And it wasn't just happening in isolation, was it?
Yeah.
There was a mention of some really targeted interventions that came out of that data analysis. They talked about addressing phonetic awareness in fourth grade.
Yes, that's a great example of how they're taking this data-driven approach and turning it into action. So they noticed that a bunch of fourth graders were missing some really important skills in phonetic awareness. And because of that dedicated late start time, they were able to get trained on a program called UFly.
You fly. Interesting. And then what do they do with that?
Well, once they had the training during their prime time, which is what they called it, the fourth grade teachers could work with smaller groups of students who needed that extra support in phonics. So they were able to provide those interventions in a much more focused and targeted way.
Okay, so they're really trying to leverage this time to address those specific learning needs. And it sounds like it was a real team effort.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The teacher who shared this example talked about working closely with their principal to get the UFly program up and running, and then collaborating with the reading team at the school to get additional training and resources. So it's not just teachers working in isolation, it's about building that support system and sharing expertise.
That's awesome. And it wasn't just the upper elementary grades either, right? They also gave an example from kindergarten about early identification of students who might need extra help.
Yes, the kindergarten teachers were using their collaboration time with specialists to compare the results of their common assessments. And this allowed them to spot those students who might benefit from some additional support even before they had to set up those formal Title I intervention groups. So they're getting ahead of the game and trying to intervene early.
Proactive. I like it. Sounds like they're really thinking about how to use this time strategically at all grade levels.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just happening within the same grade level or even within the same school. They talked about how at Eisenhower Junior High, teachers of the same subject from different grades were actually working together. Like the 7th grade math teachers were connecting with the 8th grade math teachers, that kind of thing.
So they're creating those vertical connections. Makes sense.
Mm.
Especially at the junior high level where you're really trying to build that bridge between elementary and high school.
And the grade level teams at the junior high, they already had some common planning time built into their schedules. So the late start actually gave them an opportunity to expand that collaboration across grade levels. They were focusing on those really big picture questions like what we want all students to know and be able to do, how we're going to know when they know and are able to do those things, what our response will be when students are struggling, and how we'll extend learning for students who already know what we want them to do.
So it's about alignment, making sure that there's a clear and consistent path for students as they move through the grades. And it sounds like this wasn't just about what was happening in individual classrooms. They were also using the late start time to address those broader school-wide goals.
Yes. They gave some examples of how the time was being used for discussions related to their school improvement plans. Like at one school, they were really focused on strategies to boost student growth on MAP testing, which is a standardized assessment, for their 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. So making sure that the professional learning was directly connected to those big picture goals for the school.
It's encouraging to hear about all these practical applications. But let's be real. There are always bumps in the road when you're trying to implement something new, especially at this scale. What kind of feedback did they get that indicated a need for some adjustments?
A lot of the feedback came directly from the teachers themselves. And the teacher union co-presidents, They were really proactive about gathering that input. They made a point of having those informal conversations with teachers across all the different schools, just trying to get a sense of how things were going.
So they were really trying to keep their finger on the pulse, so to speak. Sounds like a smart approach to getting some authentic feedback.
And one of the biggest things that came up was this feeling of being overwhelmed by all the data collection. Teachers were saying that they were spending so much time collecting data and filling out forms that they didn't always have enough time to actually talk about the data and plan what to do with it.
Oh, wow. So the data itself was becoming a barrier to effective collaboration. That's interesting.
And it wasn't just the amount of data, it was also the timing of it. They talked about how they might collect math data one week, and then the next week it would be SEAL data, which stands for social, emotional, and academic learning. And the problem was, even if they saw something concerning in the math data, they couldn't immediately address it as a team because the next week was already dedicated to something else.
So they're feeling this pressure to constantly move on to the next data point without necessarily having the time to process it and take action.
Right.
That's frustrating.
One of the co-presidents even said, well, we see our problem, but we can't address it right now. That really sums it up. And then beyond the data collection, there also seemed to be some confusion among teachers about what exactly this late start time was for. Like, was it individual planning time? Was it grade level planning time? Was it professional learning time?
Yeah, it sounds like there wasn't always a shared understanding of how the time should be used,
Oh.
and that lack of clarity can definitely create some problems. So it sounds like these bumps in the road were pretty significant. What do they do to course correct?
Well, the good news is that the teacher union and the administration, they came together to figure out how to make things better. And it sounds like the administration actually initiated that conversation, like the co-president said. And I think even Dr. Langman even brought it up first to us and said, this is not how we really wanted this to go.
Yeah.
You're saying this is not how we wanted this to go. So they were both on the same page about needing to make some adjustments.
That's great. So what were the key outcomes of that collaboration? What did they decide to change?
The biggest focus was on getting everyone on the same page about the purpose of the professional learning time. So they worked together to come up with clearer language, more specific definitions about how that time should be used. No more ambiguity.
Clarity is key. And it sounds like they didn't just stop at words. They also created some tangible resources to support teachers.
Right, they developed these really detailed handouts that explained what PLT was all about. They gave specific examples of what kinds of activities were appropriate for team collaboration time, and even what wasn't a good use of that time. They called these guidance documents the most powerful piece in terms of making sure everyone understood what they were supposed to be doing.
So providing that structure and those clear expectations,
Yeah.
that makes sense. And they were really explicit about the intended outcomes, weren't they?
Yeah, they said the goal was to monitor student progress, adjust instruction supports to meet their needs, but most importantly, collaborating and problem solving together to improve instruction and learning for all students. So it's all about connecting that PLT back to student success.
Makes sense. And did they make any changes to the structure of the meetings themselves?
Oh, yeah. They created some updated meeting agenda templates, and they even gave examples of how to create effective data logs. So just trying to give teams some tools to help them stay focused and use their time efficiently.
More structure, more support. I like it. And it sounds like they also made a few tweaks to the overall schedule.
Yeah, they decided to move those building-wide meetings to the beginning of the late start block. That way they could get all the announcements and updates out of the way before individual teams and departments got down to their own work.
Smart. Streamlining the process. So it's clear that they're not treating this late start program as a set it and forget it kind of thing. They're really committed to continuous improvement.
100%. And the co-president even said, my favorite part of this whole thing is it's always going to evolve and we're going to reassess it. And we'll get Jacob and I will talk about this later, but we're going to keep assessing this as it goes. And it's okay to tweak it as it goes. So they're open to feedback. They're willing to adapt. That's huge.
So what's next for the Late Start program in Darien 61? What are the key takeaways here?
Well, as of right now, they're implementing those refined guidelines, the new meeting templates, the adjusted schedule. And their main priority is to make sure that everyone understands the purpose of the PLT and how it's supposed to work. No more confusion.
And I'm assuming they're not just going to cross their fingers and hope for the best. They're going to keep gathering feedback, right?
Oh, absolutely. They've got a plan to get more input from teachers and administrators later this spring. And then they'll use that feedback to make any additional adjustments before the next school year starts. So it's an ongoing process of evaluation and refinement.
So to sum it all up, this deep dive into the Darien 61 Late Start program, it really highlights the district's commitment to creating meaningful professional learning opportunities for their teachers. And it started with a contractual obligation, sure, but it's clearly driven by a much bigger vision for how to support educators and ultimately improve outcomes for students.
And what's really important here is that they're not afraid to acknowledge the challenges and make changes along the way. They're working collaboratively, they're listening to feedback, they're constantly trying to make this program better. That's what we want to see.
Absolutely. And for all of you listening, we hope this deep dive has given you a much clearer understanding of how this program works and the lessons that other districts can learn from their experience.
Yeah, it's a story that's still being written. We're excited to see what happens next.
Now, as you're thinking about all of this, we want to leave you with some bigger questions to ponder. What are the implications of dedicating this kind of protected time for professional learning in any district? How do we balance the need for structure and data with the equally important goal of fostering authentic collaboration among teachers?
And what other creative solutions are out there? What can districts do to really support the growth of their teachers and create those conditions where every student can thrive? It's a complex issue, but these are the conversations we need to be having. So keep thinking, keep asking questions, and join us next time for another deep dive.
We'll see you then.